Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Nun Vav. We're going to do a quick review of the daf that we started yesterday, the topic of Yei Nesech. So we have three halachot here, one related to Yei Nesech and two others related to wine, but having nothing to do with Yei Nesech, but to impurity. So we started with this halacha in the Mishnah, Lokchim gat b'utam and oved kochavim. You can purchase a gat from an oved kochavim. And we saw this in different forms. You can purchase the gat. You can also tread on the grapes with the Gentile who's an idol worshiper. We're not worried at that stage of Yei Nesech because unless it goes into the pit, it's not yet what we call Gemar Malacha. It's not yet ready, and therefore it's not yet going to, no one would offer a libation yet until it's actually considered wine, and that's only once it gets into the pit. Okay, because remember, it starts in the top part, that's where you tread on them, then it trickles down through a pipe into the bore at the bottom. So that's the first halacha, which we learned there was a Mishnah Rishona and then there was a Mishnah Achrona. Now this changed over time, and in the end they switched it to say in the latter Mishnah, the later Mishnah, Ein dorchim im oved kochavim bagat. You actually can't tread on the grapes with the oved kochavim, and you also then obviously can't purchase because of what Rav Huna said, which is actually not, it wasn't Rav Huna who made this up, it was from the Mishnah, from the later time in the Mishnah where they said once it starts to come out the juices and move around in the gat up at the top and trickle down, it's already forbidden, even though it's not yet in the bore, in the pit. Okay, that's one halacha. Then there were two other halachot. One halacha actually didn't change, and that had to do with impurity. If you're working with a Jew who doesn't keep laws of impurity, then we're not going to let you not to do the botzer, not to harvest the grapes, because you're basically leading someone to take their chulin, their non-sacred produce, and turn it into impure produce, which is really a problem because once they take the truma to maschot, the truma is going to be impure, and we don't want to create a situation like that. And if you tread on the grapes with them, you're also creating a situation because you're misayea yidei v'avera. You're helping someone who's doing a transgression. Now, it's a little different when it comes to a Gentile. Now, a Gentile or an idol worshiper carries impurity, right? The rabbis deemed all non-Jews carry impurity, which means that they're also going to make this stuff impure. So, according to the Mishnah Rishona, you actually can't do it's a sur livtzol. Okay, it said here, dorchim imo ve'kochavim bagat, but lo botzrim imo. You can't do the earlier stage because you're goring tuma. You're causing, by doing the harvesting, you know that they're going to bring it, and then they're going to make it impure when they get to the gut, and that's a problem. Why can you be dorech? Why can you tread on them with them? Aren't you also causing impurity? Well, no, because at that point, the commentaries say it must be they started already treading on them by themselves, which means as soon as some of the juice came out, already it created the susceptibility to impurity and they became impure. So by you doing anything, it's already the tumah happened. Whereas when you're with a Jew, you're actually helping him to make other ones impure, and that's a problem because you're helping an over avera. The Gentile is not over avera. They don't have it. It's not one of the 7 no-chad laws not to create impurity and put impurity onto something that's chulin. And therefore, according to the Mishnah, you can't be botzer because that's going to cause tuma ultimately, but you can be dorech because at that point it's already tameh. However, the Mishnah Achrona said you can be botzer because there's mutarly grom tuma l'chulin sheberetz Yisrael. There's no problem with that. You can't be dorech together because there's the other problem, which is the Yei Nesech. Okay, and that's a review of what we did yesterday. Now we're going to go to the line in the Mishnah that talked about it's Gemar Malacha when it gets into the bore. And now, according to the Mishnah Rishona, the Mishnah that we saw, we're going to have a problem in light of another Mishnah, a Mishnah in Maaser, which also talks about Gemar Malacha, because in Maaser, you're not liable to take Truma Maschot until you complete the work. When is it considered Gemar Malacha? When it's complete. So again, we're going to see some opinions here. So starting from the fourth line there, Daf Eno Seye Nesach Ad Shiurin Labo, the Hatanya, it should be Hatnan. Doesn't it say in the Mishnah Maschot, Yain Mishiyikape. Wine, once the dregs start rising to the top, what happens is it goes into the bore. And then while it's in that pit, all the dregs that got through, right, they try to get some of them, we're going to talk about soon, that there's a masnenet, there's a strainer they put but still dregs get through, and then slowly they rise to the top. So it's not actually when it gets into the bore, it's a later stage. Okay, Rav Huna actually said it was an earlier stage. Remember, he said it was once the juices start coming out. The Mishnah Rishona had said the pit itself. And here comes a Mishnah in Masrot, which says you're only liable to take Masrot once the dregs rise to the top. So I'm Rava, lo kashya harabi akiva harabana. Rava says this is not difficult with our Mishnah because there's two different Tanaitic opinions. One is the rabbis, one is Rabbi Akiva. Did Tanya, it says Tanan. Every time it says Tanya or Tanan here, it's a mistake. It's the opposite. Tanya is in a Braita, Tanan is in a Mishnah. So this should be, there's a Braita that says, Yayin misheyered labor. That matches our Mishnah. That's the rabbi's opinion. Rabbi Akiva omer misheyekapeh. Rabbi Akiva says it's once everything starts rising. So Rabbi Akiva matches the Mishnah Masrot, and the Tanakama matches our Mishnah. Side question: Ibayilu kipoi de bo or kipoi de chavit? And then we're going to get back to our topic. But right now we're asking, when we say misheyekapeh, do we mean in the pit? Or do we mean once it goes into the barrel? Obviously, after it's in the pit, we move it to the barrel, and then already we've separated out more things. But then, like, it starts foaming at the top as it ferments, and there's some of the dregs from the fermenting process that rise to the top. So, do we mean in the bore? Do we mean the chavit? Now, I explained it that it was in the pit, and that's in fact the answer we're going to have. But they're suggesting that maybe it just said Adshi Kapeh, who said anything about a bore. Maybe it's in the chavit, in the barrel. So Tashma, let's learn it from here. Tanan. Now we're going to go back to that Mishnah that we quoted in Masrot. Yayin Mashiach Kapeh is missing a vav here. Ve'af al pisha kippah, and even though it floated to the top already, kolet minagata elyona uminatzinor v'shoteh. You can take wine that's in the upper. In other words, even once it hits the stage where the wine that's in the pit down below already started separating, the dregs rose to the top. But if you go back to the upper part, the gut where they treaded, there was still some wine there. You can take from there. You can take from the tzinor, even from the pipe. V'shoteh, you can drink without tithing the produce. Okay, without tithing the wine at the bottom. Meaning, even though it dripped down to the bottom, what's still dripping down and what's still up at the top is not a problem. You're not liable you're not obligated to take mascho yet. What does this teach you? How do we get to what we're looking for here? What we're looking for, is it kapeh in the bore or is it kapeh in the barrel? So shmamina, kipoi de bore kamrin on shmamina. Obviously, they're talking about in the bore, in the pit, because they wouldn't start saying, well, if once it's in the barrel, it starts the foam starts coming to the top, then you can still go back and take whatever's still in the gut. Those two things have nothing to do with each other. Once it leaves and it's in the barrel, it has nothing to do with the gut anymore, with the wine press, so it wouldn't be relevant. So obviously they mean when it's yikapeh in the pit and the dregs rise to the top, even though what's in the pit needs mastering, whatever's above it doesn't. Now we're going to go back to the Braita that we quoted Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. Okay, and here we're going to have a problem. V'hatani Rav Zvi b'debei Rabbi Yoshai. Rav Zvi had a version of the Braita that said, "Yayin misheyered labor v'yikapeh." Rabbi Akiva omer misheyeshaleh b'chaviyot. Notice here the Tanakama is exactly what we have Rabbi Akiva saying in the earlier Braita, that the wine is liable for masor once it gets into the pit and the dregs rise to the top. And Rabbi Akiva says, once you pour it into the barrels, which is a much later stage. So how do we reconcile those two Braita with each other? Well, tirtzanami lahach kamai tahachi. Okay, change the first Braita to read like this. So the original Braita we read, which now changes everything we said, we'll talk about that in a minute. Yayin misheyered labor v'yikapeh, Rabbi Akiva omer misheyeshaleh b'chaviyot. Okay, now you have to go back, because when Rabbi said, lo kasha harabi Akiva harabanan, doesn't really fit anymore. Now you'd have to say, because Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan don't match the Mishnah and the other Mishnah, you would have to say Yayin Mishiyakapeh is the Tanakama, the rabbi's opinion, against Rabbi Akiva. Okay? And our Mishnah, we're going to see in a minute, our Mishnah doesn't match any opinion then. We're going to have a bit of a problem with that. But we've now changed. We've moved everybody one over to one later stage, which leaves our Mishnah without really an author. So that's exactly what the Gemara is going to ask. Are you going to say there's three Tanaitic opinions, and the Mishnah in Masrot mentions two, and our Mishnah mentions a third. So basically, again, what are we arguing about? When is the wine considered wine for both libations and Masrot, right? That number one, the Gentile idol worshiper might actually end up offering it as a libation, and two, we have the owner will be, or whoever's there will not be able to drink it unless they take masir. So we have our Mishnah, which says the early stage, which is already once the juices start flowing. We have the rabbis who say once it's in the bore and the dregs rise to the top. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I said Rav Huna, the second Mishnah. Our Mishnah says once it gets into the bore, the pit. The Mishnah in Masrot says, according to the Braita in or you could say the Mishnah in Masrot also says, which is the rabbi's opinion, Yaim Mishi Kapeh, when it's in the bore and the dregs rise, so a little bit later. And Rabbi Akiva says once you pour it into the barrels. Okay, now they're saying, but does that make any sense that there's three Tannaitic opinions, right? And if there were three Tannaitic opinions, why weren't they mentioned together with each other, right? Especially in the Mishnah in Masrot that mentions two, it should have mentioned three. So they say, right, obviously it's not three. What do they say? Our big answer, Shani Yenesach Tachmiru Rabbanan. All along we assumed Gmar Malacha is Gmar Malacha. It's an objective time. Now we're going to say, no, well, maybe there is this time, this Gmar Malacha, and let's go with the two opinions by Maaser. Once it's in the bore and the dregs rise, or once you siphon it off into the barrel. But when it comes to Yenesach, we're going to be extra strict. And we're going to forbid it already once it just gets into the bore. Okay? It's just a stringency. And therefore, this whole assumption of everything we've been learning so far today, which is obviously we're making this comparison, is not true. Now, Rava, turning now to Amabed, to Lo Shanele, but Rava doesn't think that we have this distinction, and he thinks it's all one and the same. So Mokim Labik Kik Lata tonight. He's going to say, because how do we know Rava did make that distinction? Because Rava explained, you have a difficulty, our Mishnah, the Mishnah there, just resolve it and say, that's the rabbis, that's Rabbi Akiva. And he seemed to think that it was one and the same. So we're going to say, according to him, there must be three Tanaim. And when he said, this is the rabbis, this is Rabbi Akiva, what he really meant is the Mishnah in Masrot is the rabbi's opinion. And there's also Rabbi Akiva. And our Mishnah is a third opinion. It's not the simple reading of Rava, but that's the only way to really explain it once you change the Braita and change what we thought the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva were saying. Now we're going to move to the next section, which is the next part of the Mishnah said, Mashe bebor asul vashar mutal. Now once the bore, it gets into the bore, according to our Mishnah, that's when it becomes susceptible to someone offering a libation. And if a Gentile idol worshiper were to touch it, we wouldn't be able to drink it anymore. So what's in the bore is forbidden. However, everything else, meaning up above, in the pipe, in the got at the top, where they tread on the grapes, all that is permitted. Amar Rav Huna, lo shanu ela shelo achzir gargutni lagat. And Rav Huna says, there's this gargutni. The gargutni, as I said, we're going to talk about this, is a strainer. They would take the strainer and they would put it down below, right as where the pipe ends and the bore starts. They would put this strainer, and that would take away as many dregs as the strainer would hold, as it would not let through. And then the wine would be much more clear that got down to the barrel. No, to the pit. Now the problem is that when they finish pouring the wine, or at some point, they would put the gargutni, they would take it and they would put it back up at the top. Okay, it would sit in the got, and only while the wine was pouring in, they would hold it there or put it there. I don't know exactly how it worked. So Rav Huna says the stuff at the top is permitted as long as you didn't take the strainer and put it back at the top. But if you put it back in the top of if you put it back into the gat, asur would be forbidden. To which the Gemara says, okay, wait a minute. Didn't we say only once it gets in the pit? Now the assumption is the strainer is not in the pit, it's above the pit, goes from the pipe to the strainer into the pit. So what's in the pit, what's in the strainer, didn't touch what's in the pit, so it should be fine. So on what basis is it forbidden? Benitzo? Is it because, now here's a big halacha that comes up in Tuma, which is if you're pouring something, okay? Now there's, usually we say if you're pouring something, and let's say it gets into a tame cup, okay, or bowl, what's at the top, right, is as I'm pouring, it's all attached. So there's a question about nitzo. While I'm pouring, is the top part forbidden? Now, generally we say not unless it's a very thick, viscous substance like honey or something. There's a whole issue about it. But they want to say now, are you trying to say that nitzok is forbidden? Because nitzok is a machloket. There's a big debate about it. But this would say very clearly that nitzok is forbidden, because if you're going to say what's at the strainer is a problem, then it must be because of nitzok. Now, first of all, you have to ask the question. If it's because of nitzok, then also what's in the pipe should be forbidden, and what's up at the top should be forbidden, because it's all one flow. So that's another issue. Anyway, the Gemara doesn't like this, and therefore they say, no, no, no. We must have not understood the strainer issue properly. Kiditani Rabbi Chia, must be like Rabbi Chia said in some other case. Kirja pechasto slochito. They said in that case it was something else, and it was where the strainer was sitting, or something was sitting in its plate. In other words, and that's what they're going to say here. I'll explain in a second. The case must be where the strainer is actually touching the wine in the bore. Okay, the strainer could be sitting in. You ever do like a strainer if you strain something into a bowl, let's say. So often what's going to happen is when you're straining it into the bowl, the water level rises, that it's covering, basically it's in the bowl and it's also in the strainer. The liquid's in the strainer. So when you pick up that strainer, it's going to have some liquid that was already in contact with the bowl. That's the same idea here. If the strainer's in the pit, then what they're trying to say, back to what Rav Huna said, is that if you return the gargutni, that strainer, back to the top, even though it's just got a few drops of wine on it, how much wine from the boar really got in the strainer and remained there, when you put it back up top? Not very much. And normally we'd say there's laws of bitul, nullification. However, comes Rav Huna and he says we're strict when it comes to Yenesach, and even those drops are going to forbid all the wine in the gat, because now it's mixed in, and then all the wine in the gat is going to be forbidden because of Yenesach. Now we're going to hear a story about a child. He knew all the Masechet Avodah Zarah by the time he was 6. Okay, for all those learning Daf Yomi, maybe likely Avodah Zarah is your first time learning it. You're probably not 6 years old. This is obviously a big accomplishment. He was obviously a brilliant child. They asked him questions. Okay, we're going to see the question they asked him. One question, which is going to kind of branch off into a few questions. It's unclear whether he was 6 when they asked this question, or it was just this child prodigy that, when he got older, they asked him this question. Can you tread on the grapes with an idol worshiper in a wine press? Amar lehu, we said to them, yes, sure, you can do that. They said, but wait, but isn't he doing the nisuch? Can he offer a libation with his hands? To which the child said, Okay, by the way, you have to just remember, this is based on Rav Huna, who said once at the Mishnah Achrona, which is the later Mishnah, which we hold by, which is once the juices start flowing, it's a problem. They but yet he says you can do it. So he says, we tie his hands, and then he can't touch it. If he can't touch it, he can't do the libation. But can't you offer the libation with your legs? Okay, with your feet, and his feet are there. No, nisuch de regel lo shmei nisuch. The child answered no. Nobody does nisuch with their feet, right? Which makes sense. People's feet are generally dirty. It wouldn't be respectful to offer the libation with your feet. So in the end, we're going to understand that if what this child is saying, if you want to tread on the grapes with the idol worshiper, you can do it as long as their hands are tied. And then, right, I was thinking of like soccer, no touching the ball, no touching the wine, no hands at all, then you're okay. I'm going to just start this next line, but we're not going to finish it today. It was a case that happened in Nehardea. So there was a Jew and an idol worshiper that treaded on the grapes together. Shmuel waited 3 regalim to paskin on this issue, to which the Gemara is going to ask my timer what was the reason that he delayed his psak for so long. And we're going to start with an ilema, mishum de kasavar, and I'm going to stop here because the daf ends here. But if you're going to say it's because he holds something, okay, which we're going to wait till tomorrow, but they're obviously going to reject it, because if you say, so is rejected. So we'll get back to that story in tomorrow's daf. What we did today is, right, we reviewed the three halachot that were in the Mishnah. Then we went into this contradiction between our Mishnah, the Mishnah Rishona, the Bor, with the Mishnah in Maaser, the Yain Mishiyah Kapeh, and then we basically ended up saying, oh, one's the rabbis, one's Rabbi Akiva. Then we had, oh, wait, no, but what about this other Braita? This other Braita seems to have something else. Right in the middle, we had to say, what's Kipoy? Is it in the Bor or in the Chavit? We said it's in the Bor, in the pit. Then we went back and we said, but there's a different Braita with a different version of what the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva said, right? None of them really end up matching the Mishnah, to which we say, yeah, either they don't because we're strict on Yei Nesach, or maybe there's actually three opinions. Okay, and then we had to reread Rava, who said, Harabi Kiva Harabanan, it must be, oh, that Mishnah in Masro matches the rabbi's opinion, but actually our Mishnah doesn't match anyone's. There's three different opinions. And then we went to this part about what in the Bor is forbidden, but everything up top is permitted. And then we said that's as long as, Rav Huna said this, as long as you didn't bring the strainer back in. And then we had to explain, strainer must have some drops because it was mamash, it was inside the Bor and touched the wine. It had some drops of wine, and the wine is not batel. And then we ended with this question. They asked this little child who was a genius, can you tread on the grapes? And he said, oh, you can. I said, what about Yei Nesach? He said, oh, well, as long as the Gentiles' hands are tied, the idol worshippers' hands are tied, then you can actually do it and you don't have to worry. But obviously, if they weren't tied, then you have to worry and it would be forbidden. And then we have some psach that we're going to wait and see why Shmuel delayed for 3 regalim, right, which is basically almost a year, right, depending on what time, but it's a cycle of a year almost. And we'll get back to that tomorrow. Wishing everyone a good day.